All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started on time with our education and, oh, actually, that's not true. We're 3 minutes late. With our Education and Culture Committee meeting, we're actually going to take our items a little bit out of order. Our council president has another commitment, and I want to make sure that we can get to our Montgomery County Public Schools operating budget and get a vote locked in on that. So I'm going to actually push that one first. So if Mr. Howard could join us, our senior legislative analyst, if I could invite our president of the Board of Education, Ms. Shebra Evans, Dr. Jack Smith, our superintendent of schools, Nikki Diamond, our chief financial officer, and Bruce Meyer from Office of Management and Budget to join us. I'm going to just make some very brief remarks. We had a press conference with the council president. Every single year when we have difficult times like this with challenging budgets that are presented, it is under great leadership that we end up with a great budget. And I really want to thank our council president for understanding and really invoking the spirit that we heard through all of our education budget forums, Dr. Smith, in terms of the passion for making sure that we had a fully funded MCPS budget. And it's a credit to the great work that's being done within your schools. And so I really want to thank all of your partners, all of your partner unions, SEIU, MCEA, MCAP, and others who continue to contribute each and every day to the betterment of children in our schools. It really is important for us, and I'm happy that the county executive understands now that a fully funded MCPS budget is a priority of this county. And so again, I really want to thank our council president for leading the way in terms of coming up with a great resolution. I really want to thank my colleagues in Annapolis who worked very hard to come up with Kerwin Commission funding, and my fellow members that are on the Kerwin Commission for their great work as well. It truly takes a village, and this village is what came through to give us what we have before us today. So thank you to each and every one of you. I think that we've accomplished a lot when we see the results that'll come about. So just wanted to start off with that. I don't know if anybody else wants to make any opening comments or not, but Council President Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think I definitely want to echo your sentiments and really, truly express my appreciation to the Board of Education, the superintendent, all the employees, as well as the executive for their, I think, everybody's willingness to quickly identify ways to fill that gap. Because I know that a lot of deliberation went into that Board of Education request. And even though I'm sure there's a lot more that the board wanted to include, they really, truly felt that this would be something that would help us continue on our quest to constantly and always seek the best that we can when it comes to student outcomes and outcomes for our families. So really do want to express my appreciation and the willingness for everybody to work collaboratively to get us to this point. You know, there are many particular parts of the budget every year that we're constantly trying to figure out, and I'm very glad that we were able to resolve this one in such a positive and collaborative fashion. So thank you, everybody.
Councilmember Jawando.
Put my name on the list of thanks, and it was great to have a meeting with you all yesterday to hear like good news. You didn't need additional money. I know we're going to talk about this now, and so thank you for just your innovation too in finding ways to right-size your budget when there is so much need that I know. And to the council president's point, I know you all went through a deliberative process in bringing a budget forward. So we're just really happy that we're going to be able to move forward and get to 100% funding, and look forward to working with you going forward. So thank you.
All right, with that, I'll turn to Dr. Smith or Ms. Evans to add any comments that you'd like to make as well.
Sure. I just wanted to just reiterate that collaboration is the key. We're not the 14th largest school district in the nation for nothing. We are always putting our students first and our schools first. This was a school and student first focused budget. And just want to say thank you to you all. We appreciate you and knowing the importance of a public education and just really standing behind us all throughout this process.
Dr. Smith?
I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the council president and to the three of you and to you, Mr. Rice, as the chair of this committee, for your unfailing support of schools, and to the county executive for his efforts to do this. And one of the things that I think always needs to be said is that we need to maintain our high level of excellence in this school system for so long, while increasing our acceleration of really equitable access, opportunity, and learning for every single student, especially our focused students who are in populations where they have tremendous levels of learning, but we see disparities. And that's really the key, I think, to a highly successful school system. Do what works and change, improve, and progress where you're not getting the level of learning and care and well-being for students that's needed. So thank you sincerely for all you do.
Yeah, so let me turn to Mr. Howard, but just say that this is a down payment on your, Madam President's, plan of equity. This is a down payment, and a lot of what we're seeing in a lot of this budget this year reflects just that. We are continuing to make down payments on equity throughout the county and throughout these budgetary decisions. I see it on every single committee that I sit on, and I see it on the ones in which I'm not sitting on. It really is a paradigm shift for us here at the county, and I couldn't be more proud to be a part of it. So it's very exciting. Mr. Howard.
Good afternoon. So today we're going to walk through the executive's proposed budget adjustments that he sent over, the additional FY20 state aid that resulted from the Kerwin legislation, as well as a discussion of how to show some MCPS pre-K funding, and where we're going to end up from the mix of all these factors is shown in the table at the bottom of the first page, where staff will recommend that the committee provide a total appropriation to MCPS that is $30.5 million higher than what was included in the executive's March 15th budget. This $30.5 million will come from a $24.4 million increase in state aid, a $6.1 million increase in the county contribution, and the total recommended appropriation would be $8.6 million above the maintenance of effort level. So first on page 2, we'll turn to the county executive's April 29th budget adjustment. The executives submitted this action after the press conference that the council president held, that the rest of the committee members also attended, with the board president and the superintendent and other council members as well. The executive submitted an action to propose an FY25 operating budget for MCPS in the amount of $35.4 million. Since then, he submitted a revised recommendation that's the $30.5 million number. The key components of that in terms of county contribution, the executive's proposed adjustment assumes increased local funding for MCPS in FY20 of $5.1 million over his recommendation from March. And as he announced at the press conference, the county anticipates receiving additional state funding for 911 emergency telephone systems. And according to OMB staff, this action will free up $5.1 million in FY20 general fund revenue that can then be allocated to MCPS. The second component of the budget adjustment was the additional state aid from the Kerwin legislation, and this will provide approximately $24.4 million for MCPS in FY20. One note that this additional funding is contingent upon the governor signing the legislation and releasing the funds as identified in the bill. I think at this point everyone hopes and thinks that will happen, but if that were not to occur, the council and board may need to revisit these proposed changes. So the table on the top of page 3 summarizes the additional Kerwin funding by category and how MCPS would allocate those funds based on the requirements in the legislation for FY20. So there's funding for special education, concentration of poverty, struggling learners, mental health coordinator, teacher salary grants, and supplemental pre-K dollars. And the FY20 Kerwin funding column shows the total amount of money MCPS would anticipates receiving under the legislation for each of those categories. And then the proposed allocation shows how much of that additional funding would go towards items, things that were already in the board's request as enhancements, as well as dollars that would be added to the budget that were not originally in the board's request. So in total, you have about $10.4 million of the Kerwin dollars that would go towards meeting the board's existing request, and about $14 million that would be added to the board's request above and beyond what was originally planned in their spending. Along with this, the bottom of page 3, we describe some related MCPS funding actions. And as a result of the teacher salary grant, MCPS also is adjusting their budget by about $6 million due to two factors. First, the corresponding benefit costs related to the teacher salary increases. And second, projected costs from providing corresponding increases to similar non-teacher positions to maintain pay equity among employee groups. MCPS plans to fund most of this increase by making $3.9 million in reductions to its original request through two actions. One is increased use of group insurance fund balance in FY20. At the last committee work session, we discussed the higher than anticipated fund balance the MCPS had in its group insurance funds, and their plan to draw that down over several years. So this will just accelerate that by a small amount. And the second component is that they, based on the current year enrollment showing less growth than originally anticipated, MCPS believes they can decrease the FY20 projected enrollment by about approximately 350 students, and most of this would occur at the high school level, and this is just aligning their projected increases in FY20 with what they're actually seeing come through the doors in FY19. On page 4, I had originally included some staff recommended technical changes, and this related to the executive's original submission of a $35.4 million adjustment, and but he did revise that to make it $30.5 million. The proposed increases from the county contribution and the $24.4 million from the Kerwin state aid funding get you to $29.5 million. And the last million we'll talk about in the next section, which is the pre-K appropriation. So the executive's March 15th budget stated that $1 million from the $7 million included in the early care and education NDA would go to fund expansion of MCPS's pre-K programs, as was requested in the board's budget. However, that funding was not included in the MCPS appropriation. It was just included in the NDA. So in conjunction with the additional county and state funds included in the executive's budget adjustment, council staff recommends adding the $1,007,411 to MCPS's local appropriation for that pre-K funding the board had requested, and then making a corresponding decrease in the early care and education NDA. The action aligns with the executive's stated intent for these funds and does not change the total funding amount of $7 million included in the overall budget for early care and education enhancements. If we did not take this approach, then the board would need to request and the council would need to approve a supplemental appropriation in a compressed time frame after the start of the fiscal year on July 1st, but before the council's summer recess, in order for MCPS to have programming in place for the start of the school year. So this, making this adjustment now seems to be a better approach in terms of aligning the timing for the funding.
All right. I see that Mr. Meyer wants to make a comment. Mr. Meyer?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rice. The executive sees these funds as a grant to MCPS. He believes until we know the results of the program as proposed in MCPS and the results of other programs that will be using that original $7 million, it is best to wait until we see that this is in fact the best use of these funds, and therefore appropriation at this time in the MCPS budget and including it within MOE and the county contribution is premature until we see all the results of all the funds.
Let me turn to the council president who worked with the county executive to get her take. Council President Navarro.
I did not have conversations with the executive regarding how he planned to address this issue, so there's nothing that I can really add. I think that it would be important to hear from the superintendent in terms of how to treat this particular allocation. I think that the bottom line is that, as long as the funds are accessible for however they need to be utilized at a timely fashion, I don't have anything else to add. I know there are some issues regarding obviously how it's going to be counted regarding MOE and things of that nature, and we want to follow the law. So however it can be made available, I would be okay.
Dr. Smith.
Sure. There's some technical and some timing issues with this. The technical issue would be, as Council President Navarro just referenced, and that is that until the money is added to the school system's base budget and falls under the maintenance of effort law, we really can't spend it and can't even really accept it until it's allocated to us by Maryland state law. So that's a technical issue. So we're currently planning to use this money, if allocated, for a McDonald Knowles site. You know, we opened McDonald Knowles this past year and is operating right now with a little over 100 students, pre-K students down county. And so we're going to open an up-county site if this money is allocated for about 100 pre-K students in the Germantown, Gaithersburg area. And as well as the money that's coming directly from the Kerwin allocation. And we certainly, everyone expects it to be signed and the money to be released, but we'll all have a big sigh of relief when it is. But we're forging ahead with plans to extend half-day into full-day and add additional seats across the county with the Kerwin money around pre-K. So that's the short version of what we're doing with the money if it's allocated.
Let me turn to Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to be clear, Mr. Howard, the recommendation is to appropriate it now and not wait for, but the county executive's position is they want to wait. My question is, how long would it take? I get the MOE concern that that the county executive's representatives are raising. If we, assuming Governor Hogan does what he should do and signs the bill and releases the money, which we know has been a problem sometimes, but in this case, I think he's going to do it. How long would it take for us to come back? The school board would have to request, and then we'd have to turn around. What's the timing? I don't want to get in the way of what you're describing. I want to make sure we can get going as soon as possible.
So this is the $1 million would be separate from the Kerwin money, right? So this is all county dollars. And so in terms of timing, if it was not included in MCPS's budget as part of the council's final budget actions, then the board would have to request a supplemental appropriation, and the council can't approve any supplementals for FY20 until after July 1st, of course. So the board would have to request it, send it over to the council. The council would need to introduce it and approve it, and have that all done before the council's summer recess. And then the money would be available to MCPS to start planning and hopefully be able to spend by the time the school year begins. Is it possible that we could do it within that compressed time frame? Yes, we've done it before for certain things. From council staff's opinion, it's just a cleaner way of doing it would be just to include it in the budget now, assuming that the intent all along was, as was stated in the executive's budget, the intent was to provide $1 million of that funding to MCPS.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so I agree with staff. I think that, again, look.
If I could.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What it would
Dr.
mean
Smith.
would be we would delay probably until the beginning of second semester the opening of that center, because we wouldn't be able to start the actual work until the money was allocated.
Yeah, so and not even just that, but there's no question in my mind that this was a down payment for Kerwin, and this was in advance for Kerwin and our expansion of pre-K. So from that perspective, it's not as though we're, Mr. Meyer, I kind of take a little bit of an exception with what you said, because we all know the efficacy of pre-K. And we've continued to expand pre-K slots throughout the county. You don't need to respond, because I trust me, you don't want to argue with me about the efficacy of pre-K. And from that perspective, it's one in which, from my standpoint, it's very clear that we're going to do more and more when it comes to our efforts around it. It was the council president who started this initiative long before I joined the council, who was focusing on this effort, both in the private sector and now, in county government. And so we've continued, and our commitment is there and will always be there to continue to expand. We've done when the county executive has not. Both County Executive Leggett, as well as, and now County Executive Elrich has come up and worked with the council president to his credit and said, hey, this is something we want to do. It's not a one-off shot, right? And so from that perspective, I think that it's very clear this is something that we're going to continue to do. So, I think that there's sentiment here. We agree with council staff. So, all right.
Okay, so on the bottom of page 4 and the top of page 5 are council staff's recommendations for the committee to consider. and it shows a approved FY20 tax-supported funding for MCPS of $2.514 billion. The recommended E&C adjustment column is the appropriations that I'm recommending the committee approve, and you can see that the county appropriation is $6.1 million above the executive's recommendation, and that does include the $1 million for the pre-K that you just discussed. And the state aid is $24.4 million above what was included in the executive's budget from the Kerwin dollars. I do want to note one other thing. You would also be approving a $12,000 decrease in non-tax supported instructional television special revenue fund in FY20. I had not noted that in the last work session, but that is just due to aligning the actual funds that are available for all the agencies. And we had a similar $12,000 decrease for the college that you approved. So the recommendation would be to approve the tax-supported funding as well as the non-tax-supported dollars as shown in the table on page 5. These actions will not only fully fund the board's FY20 operating budget request by closing that initial $14.5 million gap, but also provide MCPS with an additional $16 million in spending authority.
Terrific. And I see no lights on, so I think we are all set with all of there's no objections to the direction that we've headed in from council staff's recommendations. Thank you again for your partnership and great work. Thank you to the county executive for understanding the direction we were headed in and working with our council president to come up with a way to get us to full funding for MCPS. Thank you very much. All right. We're going to move on to our next item, and I'm going to turn to our council president, who does have to leave, to make an opening statement regarding our Arts and Humanities Council NDA, as we are joined by Ms. Linda Price, our legislative analyst, Ms. Susan Jenkins, our chief executive officer for the Arts and Humanities Council, and Ms. Deborah Lambert from our Office of Management and Budget. And I'm going to turn it over to our council president.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I apologize that I do have to leave the committee work at this moment, but I did want to acknowledge this particular item and also the particular proposal on page 4 regarding putting an amount, I think it's $550,000 on the reconciliation list for undesignated grants. There is a breakdown. I'm sure the committee is going to discuss that in terms of how that was going to happen, but I just wanted to be on record supporting placing these items on the reconciliation list, and really excited, Ms. Jenkins, for the extraordinary energy that is out there in the county with a lot of emerging and there seems to be something happening, because I've been seeing a lot of really great new programming throughout the county. And as I shared with you, I happened to come across on social media of an announcement for a particular program at the Sandy Spring Museum. And this is Afro Puerto Rican live drumming workshop. And as I was leaving very early in the morning, my husband said, "Where are you going? Are you going to work?" And I said, No, I'm going to this really cool, dance workshop that I signed up to." And he said, "Well, somebody's going to recognize you, and it's probably going to involve some work." And I said, No, that's not going to happen at all. And it was great. So I got there, spent an hour and a half dancing and sweating and everything. And at the very end, the director from the Sandy Spring Museum says, "And it's great to have Councilman President Navarro here today." And I'm going, oh, Lord, help us all. But anyhow, what was striking about that experience is that at the beginning of the workshop, they asked how many people were there for the first time visiting the Sandy Spring Museum, and it was over 90% raised their hand. And this was a true reflection of our county. We had people from all over, people from all different backgrounds, African American, African people, white folks, Latino people, young people, and it was so uplifting in terms of the history behind this particular cultural tradition. But also it drew people to that part of the county and that particular museum. And so I share that because to me that was really another example of what we can do in the county to provide access to that type of programming that attracts so many people, and it's not something that we had ever seen before. And so just like that, I think that these types of funds can really help, I think, boost and continue to grow that kind of very innovative but such important programming. So just want to thank you and thank the committee members also for this particular kind of recommendation as well. And I hope that it, receives the appropriate support. And I apologize, I have to run now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Council President. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Council President. No, this is your meeting. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Let me start off before I turn this over to Ms. Price, and I did want to turn it over to Ms. Jenkins to make any opening comments. There's been a lot of angst in the arts community. Education and culture is new, and with a new committee and new leadership comes a new vision. And I want to let folks know, and I've met with a number about what some of my vision entails. Of course, we have two other members who are here with us on the Education and Culture Committee, but you heard from Council President Navarro. What we've seen in the arts, unfortunately, is sort of a stagnation, and this is no sort of negative on anyone, including Ms. Jenkins, because we haven't provided the appropriate support necessary for the arts in the past years that I think it deserved or that it needed. I am an arts dad. I have a daughter who has claimed part of my kitchen as her art making space. I have an older daughter who goes around the house singing every musical under the sun, and who was just the lead role in her musical at her high school. I love the arts. And I think that, again, we have to be very serious about talking about how important the arts is in our community. It is not a convenience. The arts is not something to do when there's nothing else to do. The arts is an economic engine. The arts is an opportunity for expression. The arts is mental health for many. The arts is empowering, oftentimes for those who have disabilities. The arts speaks to so many people. And I think that, again, we have not given it enough credit for what it truly is. And so that's why I'm excited about having the charge of leading this effort from a committee in terms of rebuilding the arts in Montgomery County. But with rebuilding also comes uncomfortability. It also means that things oftentimes are torn down before they're built back up again. There is going to be change. And I want folks to be aware of that, because that's what happens when we're restarting something and trying to build up a new structure. I have expressed my concerns about a number of things that impact our arts organizations that our arts organizations have no control over. Those are things that I will be looking at in greater detail, and this committee will be taking up in conjunction with our Office of Legislative Oversight as we look at the future of arts in our county. It's going to be incredibly important for us to make sure that there are no obstacles that are put in front of organizations that are continuing to thrive and continuing to try and provide great arts, unique arts structures for our community as a whole. So I know there are a number of council staff recommendations, Ms. Price, that you have. We will go through those in the packet. I will just say for you, Ms. Jenkins, that in working with Ms. Price, in working with our Office of Legislative Oversight, shortly this summer we will be having and convening a work session specifically to deal with our arts venues here in Montgomery County, looking at our very large venues to some of our smaller but still large venues and how they work with the smaller groups that are inside of them, and how those relationships work, how our relationships as oftentimes the county landowner are with these organizations that then are doing the management of our facilities. We don't want to tell anybody how to make their own business model, but we also have to make sure that it's, as we provide funding for a lot of these contracts, that we are ensuring that it's doing the best it can for our greater community as a whole. And I have some concerns that maybe some of those relationships aren't working as best as they could be. And so we'll certainly be paying very close attention to those sooner rather than later, because I know there are some pressing issues that are before us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Price, but, oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Jenkins, did you want to make any opening remarks?
No, council member, other than to just thank you for your support and for your thoughtful consideration about how we can leverage the county's assets for us all to achieve overall county goals, as well as to achieve sector goals, not only for the arts and humanities, but for all of the sectors in which the arts and humanities play a role. So with that, I'd rather hear from Ms. Price, and then if I might have the opportunity to comment, I'd love to do so.
Absolutely. So I'll
Thank
turn it
you.
over to, let me ask Mr. Giwando. You're good? Okay, excellent. Ms. Price.
Thank you. First, I wanted to bring the committee's attention to page 4 at the top. I just want to point out that the arts and humanities budget has remained unchanged since FY19. What the executive has recommended is the same amount that's been appropriated for the last 2 fiscal years. There's been no growth. A lot of that has been to a number of fiscal constraints that have been on the budget. But at this point, it is time for us to start to beef back up and enhance the services that are provided and the grants that are made available to a number of arts organizations in the county. Therefore, staff has recommended that we increase the budget for grants, for funds made available for grants by an amount of $550,000. This is consistent with the recommendation that's been made by Ms. Jenkins and the Arts and Humanities Council. Instead of adding that amount in full, I have recommended that we place that on the reconciliation list in 3 tranches. The first amount would be for $250,000, and then the other 2 would just be for $150,000. One thing that I have recommended in relation to this is that the funds that are approved in the reconciliation list process be added to the Arts and Humanities Council's budget as an undesignated amount. This would allow the Arts and Humanities Council flexibility to address some of the needs that they've been seeing over the last 2 years. They haven't been able to give out the full amounts because the resources that they have available just don't meet the demand. So as our designated local arts organization, I recommend that we add any additional money and give Arts and Humanities Council the opportunity to best divvy out those funds. One of the things that had been recommended by the Arts and Humanities Council was to be able to have the opportunity to grant without condition. Council staff has not recommended taking away the categories that we have immediately, but definitely coming back and looking at changes that we can make to the funding structure of the Arts and Humanities Council and the budget appropriation. So there is a work session set up for July 22nd, and I think that that would be a great opportunity for us to look further at the history of the funding and look at any additional changes that can be made going forward.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Price, for your great work in this recommendation. Let me just start off by saying this. There's no question that we are going to support additional funding for our grants process. Our Arts and Humanities Council and our arts organizations have been laying stagnant, as I said in my opening remarks, and we need to start building that back up. I think that and I don't make motions as chair. I make sure of that with every single one of my committees, so I'm going to turn to Councilmember Giwando. I would just like to address something that I did receive. While the Montgomery County Arts Advocates did support the $550,000, actually received a letter from a number of organizations within the Arts Advocates who expressed some concern about the designated funding. And I want to read something that it says and then make a comment. It says, allowing the AHCMC to change that allocation at its own discretion threatens this delicate balance and inappropriately abdicates fiduciary responsibility for the allocation of taxpayer revenue from elected officials to unaccountable private citizens. Concerns me a bit because that's our grants process here on the county council. It's what we do every single year. We have public folks who are involved in the space who come in and they work with council staff and evaluate the grants and make recommendations to the council. They actually, and we approve the majority of those with very rare exceptions. And I know Carolyn Chin, who heads that up, does a tremendous job. She's here in the audience. And so that's not a great argument because it's one that we do right now. So from that perspective, I don't have a concern with having the organization that's in charge of doing this, who's been doing it for a very long time, to continue to do so. I do feel as though the flexibility should be there for this year as we increase the funding. So I do support that. Let me just say this. When it comes to our process as a whole, we do need to talk about that in July and talk about what it is that we want to do, because I would like to see it reflected as a more competitive process like what we see with our grants, to where folks have to come up with proposals and not just get money based on the fact they've always gotten money, but what is it that they're doing and showcase. And a lot of our arts organizations that I talk to that I express this had no fear because they know they're doing great things in the community. And so from that perspective, I think it would be good because they would actually be able to continue to leverage not only the existing funding that they have, but additional funding on top of that. And there will also be small, unknown organizations that'll be out there that'll come up with creative things that they're going to be able to do to reach our community and reach untapped potential that's there and also be beneficiaries. I don't want to have to create these categories and say, well, you had a great idea, but sorry, we've reached the limit. You can't play. That's not what this should be about. And so, once again, when I talk about vision, and we can talk about this at our work session, that's what it'll be for. We're not rolling this out now, but I've had a conversation with a number of arts advocates about this. So folks are already on notice in terms of that's what I hope we'd get to, something that mirrors what we've seen and the success that we've seen with our grants program. So let me turn it over to Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice, and thank you, Ms. Price, for the presentation, and good to see you, Ms. Jenkins. Glad you're here. So just before I make the motion, I'd like to make a couple comments on the July 20th discussion, which I think is, I'm glad we're doing it then and not doing it in the budget process. I think that's the appropriate time to make a change and discuss the ramifications and the history, and particularly for me, 4.5 months in, I appreciate a little more time. Yeah, I know, feel like it. But I appreciate that discussion, and I'm excited that we do have education and culture now, and we get to work with all the great arts organizations and our libraries and everything that's come under the committee, so I'm excited about that. And one of the things, having been on the grant side, receiving side as a nonprofit, not in the arts and humanities space, but just the community grants, and as we're going through that process now, as Mr. Rice mentioned, we have our staff that's doing a great job. You know, we have some work to do there too, as far as how we evaluate and look into those grants. And one of the things when I ran for office, and I'm very focused on now, is that it's not always the squeaky wheel that should get the oil. And some of them should, and initiatives certainly should be rewarded, but there are so many programs, just as I'm looking at this grants list, you know, I have to constantly fight against, okay, who's been in to see me? That doesn't mean that their idea is better than someone who hasn't been in to see me, and I need more information to evaluate that. And I think providing that flexibility and setting up a framework and context is something we should be doing just to be good stewards of public funds. And so I look forward to the conversation in July and agree wholeheartedly that overall we should be increasing funding for the arts, though, as well. So the motion I'd like to make, Mr. Chair, is that we would modify staff's proposal slightly to add the $550,000 in 2 tranches, in one of $300,000 and one in $250,000, and put that on the reconciliation list in 2 tranches.
I will second that motion. So we have Council President Navarro, Ms. Price, I'd like to just reflect that Council President Navarro expressed support regardless of how the tranches would be. So that I'd like that record to be reflected as a 3-0 in terms of support of increasing the grants in the total amount of $550,000, one tranche at $300 and another at $250. Okay.
Okay, so
Back
then
to
the
you.
other item for review today deals with administration. Again, administration has been held flat as well since FY18. Council staff has received information from Arts and Humanities Council on some of the additional expenses that have been increasing. They have increased costs for a number of operating expenses related to their grant-making software, their record-keeping software, payroll software, their audit firm. The costs for that have also gone up. Consistent with the recommendation from the Health and Human Services Committee, 3% inflationary adjustments have been recommended. That amount would total $16,216, which gets to part of the increases that Arts and Humanities Council has been seeing. Council staff has recommended an additional $25,000 on top of that to more accurately reflect some of the costs that they have been incurring over the last 2 years.
So, I'm sorry.
No, Mr. Giwando.
So the total, just so I'm clear, is
Sure. The total increase for administration would be $41,000.
And so that's the 25 and the 16.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Got it. I move that we accept that recommendation.
Second. All right.
And I don't know if Ms. Jenkins wants to comment on it at all.
Ms. Jenkins?
Thank you both for your thoughtful comments, for your, especially for Councilmember Giwando, for your quick look at the community and your intensive stare on what work is being done. I can't express my appreciation even more greatly to Councilmember Rice, who has worked on different committees that we've served for several years and has watched the trajectory of our work and the dance that is public funding, sometimes the ebb and flow of it, and the needs for adjustments over time. When I took this position 10 years ago and funding was riding high at around $5 million, it just seemed like a great job to have, right? Only a month later, the worst economic depression since the Great Depression occurred, and we saw budget being taken from out under us during that fiscal year, and then subsequent years to a real low in 2012 and 13. So to have worked together and to be working with you now and Councilmember Navarro as we step back, look at this completely new committee and the new thought processes, overlaying the equity principles that the county is adopting, it seems like just the right time to signal that if we weren't to be about the change that is, then we would be stagnant ourselves. And one of the hallmarks of being in Montgomery County, one of the exciting things of living in Montgomery County, is that we are progressive not only in thought, but in the way that we have approached our citizenry, our residents, our environment. There's a lot to be proud of. So as we look at how our sector supports the economy in Montgomery County at an investment of $8.8 million that's yielding $181 million in revenue, if you took that away, someone would notice. It would be felt. We're hiring more in our sector than fire and chief combined. And when you look at that and you look at that income, what it generates, how we're bringing people from outside communities, how we're educating children, very impactful, having actually nothing to do with the product of the arts, but about economic development and driving. So know that we are eager to stand in partnership with you as the designated local arts council. And I just hope that I can ask a question But make a note in that I had not read MCAA's letter, but I would say that I think that a misstatement may be that it's not that we are just an arbitrary agency with some arbitrary principles making decisions, but by law, there's a legal resolution from the county by law that designates the Arts and Humanities Council legally as your extended arm to re-grant taxpayer dollars. And there's a method noted in that law that tells how we go about doing that business. So I just would like to make that correction for the record, that this is a legal designation and we fall under it through our contract with the county. That said, while I think that change is always scary, there are a lot of things to be addressed. We're coming up on the 2020 census, and we know that the 2010 census, for the first time, designated Montgomery County a majority-minority community. That's a term that I have a lot of trouble with, but it is stated federally, so I'm stating it now. So in order to, for the last 10 years, as we've looked now at how that shows up, what that means, who is the dominant culture, what was the once dominant culture, who is the now dominant culture, how do we respond to that? And so we have begun to take steps in order to do that. And we understand that if we're not doing that in partnership with the community, we cannot get it done. 3 really important things that I think that our board adopted this fall. 3 equity principles, racial equity principles, but equity nonetheless, are that we are committed to brave conversations about difficult subjects. We are committed to understanding that sometimes the power dynamics need to shift, and that sometimes as a result, that can end up to be some uncomfortable situations that we should be having brave conversations about. And lastly, we do know that nothing about us without us can be for us. And so just like we've done in the past when we've made major changes to our grants, policies, procedures, guidelines, we seek the input of the community so we can reflect what it is that they need. If we are re-granting taxpayer dollars, it's our goal to make sure that we're getting that money to people and giving it to them where they need it and how they need it. So I responded to Ms. Ross of MCAA on April 23rd to an inquiry she sent me asking to meet about what she had heard might be our changes. And here's my response. Thanks for your note. AHCMC has no plans to change our FY20 guidelines and the grant policies that accompany these guidelines. Concurrently, and as we have mentioned on several occasions, AHCMC is working toward equity in our grant making. As such, and to learn more about the historical inequities and implicit bias, AHCMC board and staff engaged in racial equity training this winter. We'll be offering scholarships to racial equity training to the field this summer. Of course, prior to making any significant changes in our grant making, it will be imperative for AHCMC to hear from the field regarding how we might achieve greater equity in our grant making. To achieve that goal, and as I've mentioned previously, we'll be hosting community conversations in the summer to hear how we might hear from the field on how to do so. Considering this, we ask for your patience until we have the opportunity to conduct the community conversations and consider what changes may be appropriate for now and into the future. So please know that we are completely in partnership with you on the council and look forward to the opportunity to talk with you and the community. But I want to assuage your and everyone else's fears. I had a call from Councilmember Friedson just before I attended today. And there are no plans. It's on the website. It's stated in public. FY20 grants will go forward, especially for large organizations, the majority of which govern MCAA, that the formula And the way that Arts and Humanities Council proceeds with that formula is de rigueur. It won't be until we have the conversations with the community that those changes will be made. And so the appropriation that we receive now for FY20 will be allocated in ways that meet demand, but also serve where we see. So it could be that we're giving more funds in advancement grants, or it could be for small and mid-size, or it could be it's added to the bonus. But we won't know now until we see all of the budgets. But I can't say more unequivocally. Things are the same, and where we are now is just letting the community know. Thanks for the opportunity.
I really want to say thank you, Ms. Jenkins, because, one of the things that is a false dichotomy amongst folks who talk about grants and pitting folks against each other. We don't want to pit organizations against each other. The reality is that's what happens. I'm just going to be real. With a finite amount of money, everybody wants a certain amount for their organizations. If you have all of yours, that means that somebody else may not get all of theirs. I don't know what else is the definition of pitting folks against each other but that, within a finite amount of resources. So let's just be real about that and dispense of that supposed fear when that's the case of what we find ourselves in. And that's with everything. Schools is pitted against fire is pitted against DOT, transportation is pitted against environment. These are all things that we deal with every single day. You deal with them in your own lives. What are you going to spend your money on? Is it your first and favorite child or your last? Just kidding.
Hope you're not
That's
asking
all.
me
We
that
need it
question.
all.
Yes, Councilmember Jawando.
Oh, my.
But the reality is, and we laugh about it, but the thing is that, look, these aren't easy decisions. These aren't easy decisions, and it's very hard to decide where money goes when it's limited. The federal government, it's a little bit different. They get to play around and print money, and they can do things a little bit differently than we can.
But then we pay.
Well, I'm not even going to talk about what our responsibility is and what we're on the hook for. But we here have a greater responsibility because we're within a balanced budget. And so it really is important for us to make sure that every single one of those dollars is working for us to the best extent practicable. And that means that some folks may not get what they want. That's truly what it means. And I've understood that throughout my 12 years of service in office, and for these next 4 years, it's going to be the exact same way. There are tough decisions that are to be made. But I did want to highlight one thing that you said and channel the council president, who isn't here, because she is leading our equity efforts here on the council. And there was an article that was sent to me that I read that talks about, is equity the new coconut water? It's a great article, and I encourage everyone to read it. I'm a huge fan of coconut water and always have been. So this new trend of folks being like, yeah, coconut water, and I drink it before the gym and after the gym, and after I've been out drinking. I some of my younger friends have said that. It's one of those where, from my perspective, I've always loved coconut water. And I've always loved equity. It's the reason why I ran for office, because I saw inequities that existed in my community and felt as though the best way to address them was to be an elected official and make those decisions to affect that change. And that's what I've been fighting for all of these past 12 years, has been to make sure that that happens. So this is not the flavor of the month. This is not something that is going to be, oh, well, let's just bide the time and the council will be over its equity phase in another couple of years, because I know that we have other leadership that's coming behind us that will continue to carry on the great work. And so equity is not the new coconut water. Equity is here to stay. It will be infused in everything that we do in terms of this council, in terms of our analysis, and it is my hope that all of the elected officials moving forward continue to embrace this concept. With that being said, equity has many faces. Right. Equity is not just a racial equity lens, right? There are plenty of other inequities that are existing in our communities as well, and we need to address those also as a means of, through the arts as well as through a lot of our other budgets. And so I look forward to that conversation because during that, we're going to talk about all of those. And so I want folks to remember, just because you're not black or brown does not mean you're not a part of the equity conversation. It involves every single one of us. That's what true equity is about. So I think that we're going to do some great things. I really think that we're going to take this to the next level. You're already seeing it. And so by all of my arts community, I hope that they're excited about the fact that there's a new energy around doing more for the arts. You see it in terms of what we've already done today in putting this additional money on the reconciliation list. This is just the beginning. There is a renaissance for arts in our community. I'm hoping to lead this committee to ensuring that we get this done and get it done right. Ms. Price.
Thank you. So the next item is for the Arts and Humanities Matching Funds. $200,000 has been allocated in this fund now since FY14. Council staff recommends continuing to allocate these dollars. I've been in conversations with the executive branch regarding their plans for the executives ball, which the lion's share of the dollars in this fund actually go towards. It's my understanding that the ball will continue to occur, so it is necessary to leave these funds in this account. However, any funds that are unspent would go towards the Arts and Humanities Council's Power to Give matching fund.
So, Ms. Lambert, and I'm not sure if you're able to answer this question for me, what are the plans for the Arts and Humanities Executive Ball?
At this point, I don't have that information.
And if we could pen a letter from the committee to the county executive asking for a description of what this executive ball may be. I have a couple issues. My first issue is that, and look, this was, when County Executive Leggett was here, and I know County Executive Leggett's wife, our former First Lady, has been a staunch advocate for the arts. And so appropriately so, I did not push why it is that we continue to call this the Executive Ball when it is truly something that is the Montgomery County Arts and Humanities Ball. This is county funds. It's not owned by the county executive. I know that the initiative was born with, from the executive side, but at the end of the day, this funding comes from us all. And so from that perspective, I just really want to understand moving forward in the future, what it is that's our structure, what it is that our objective is, what do we intend to get out of this beyond, I know it's a huge fundraising night for us, but how we can build on this event and make it even better and stronger. So from that perspective, I really want us to take a closer look. I don't want, because I was concerned that one of the comments, and it was council staff's take on this, that said, though it may be on a smaller scale than previous years.
Due to where we are in the fiscal year for planning to occur, planning would have needed to start at this point. It's my understanding that if it is held, it would possibly be in a different location. It like I said, maybe on a smaller scale than what it has been in previous years, just due to how much is needed to actually plan the event and where they are in the process.
And that tremendously concerns me because, again, the funding goes to the arts. This is a fundraiser to help support arts programs. And so if we are leaving this on the table and just letting it languish, that means less funding for arts organizations. And so the work that we're doing here by putting additional money into the budget is eaten away at by us not having. So if we can ask for an urgent response, if the county executive is not willing nor is able to put forth a full force effort in putting this on, then this committee will certainly be interested in taking the helm and making sure that this event is something that's just as successful as what we've seen in previous years. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice, for the comments. And I would agree, I would love to know what's going on with that, and I know we'll send a letter. Ms. Jenkins, so in the past, I know we're in a new paradigm now. We allocate these matching funds, and you have played a big role with the executive's office in planning, correct?
I have not.
You have not. Okay. Oh, why is that? Would you like to? Let me rephrase. Do you think that's an appropriate function for the council?
The executives ball has been the Arts and Humanities Council at one time in 2008, 2009, and perhaps into 2010 produced the executives ball.
Right.
I began my job in 2008, as I've said, and as I've said before, because the creator has a sense of humor that I'm not always tied into, the worst economic downturn happened, and at that time, a brand new CEO came in the fall. The executive ball was already happening. I then took, when the ball concluded, I did an audit of revenue versus expenses, and saw that the Arts and Humanities Council, it cost the Arts and Humanities Council something over $20,000 to produce it. So we began to advocate for funds in order to produce it, and that was not the vision of Mrs. Leggett. The vision of Mrs. Leggett was that it would be produced in a budget-neutral situation. There would be no funds for the production to the Arts and Humanities
Right.
Council, and that an all-volunteer committee would serve to produce it. And so at that time, Mrs. Leggett said, well, we'll just produce it because we don't have the appropriation to give the Arts and Humanities Council to produce it. And so since that time, it was produced by an independent committee that then gathered up the sponsors for it and were responsible for production details. So I've said that to say that as it moved into an all-volunteer event, my board right now is not a board that is in a position to volunteer to produce a huge event like this. And my board chair and my board have already made a statement that they are not in a position to volunteer to produce this. So I think that were the event, were the county to ask the Arts and Humanities Council if it could produce it, we would have to understand how the production of the event were funded in order that it was done, because our staff is at capacity for their daily work.
Sure.
And we are not in a position, having produced over 50 to 60 big events like this myself during my career, I would tell you that it's no small ducats to put on an event like that. And so were that to happen, an entire production team would need to be hired to do it. And Arts and Humanities Council, at this moment, it's not in our FY 19 or 20 budget plans, and we would need an outside company to do that, to do that. And certainly I would have to get my board's approval, and right now their stance has been, no, we cannot produce the executive's ball.
Got it. And Linda, maybe this is for you, Ms. How much money was raised last year?
I don't have that information. I will say that the county provides matching funds. For that, we actually don't pay for the operating funds to actually produce the ball. We provide a match to the funds that are raised. So I wanted to point that out at this point, and possibly OMB might have a number for how much has been doled out at this
Okay,
point.
so we just need more information on all of this. I mean, I noticed there was even this year, there was big transition in who had traditionally done it, and there was a whole bunch of concern, are they going to raise enough money at the so I think, to Councilmember Rice's point, we want to make sure this event's successful so it can raise money for all our great arts organizations, but realizing we're in a period of transition. So I think getting some of these answers from the executive's office would be very helpful so we can figure out what we need to do.
I'd like to say this also, if I might, is that I usually get information from the Executives Ball Volunteer Committee Coordinator who gives me copies of disbursements made. The funds are settled at the Community Foundation.
Right.
So when people contribute to the Executives Ball in the past, those funds have gone to the Community Foundation. Then the Community Foundation cuts the checks, and then the Arts and Humanities Council matches the checks in the matching fund, right? However, this year, we have not received that information. I just had a conversation with that Executive Ball Committee coordinator this week and asked if I could see copies of the checks so that I can validate that grants were made. I was told that she was still waiting on some of the funds that had been raised to come in, and that at that point she would have to ask the Community Foundation to generate the checks. And so as a result, I don't know, and I don't believe that they know exactly what was cleared, because they have to wait for all the donations to come in. I've been told that on Friday of this week, tomorrow, that information will be sent over to the Community Fund, and I just happened to sit on a panel yesterday with the CEO of the Community Foundation, Anna Hargrave.
Yep.
And Anna and I talked about it, and Anna assured me that the Community Foundation would release the funds as soon as they get the information from the Executive Ball Committee volunteer coordinator.
So I'm assuming, though, that the 200,000 number wasn't pulled out of the air, that's more than enough to cover what has traditionally been
Oh,
a matching amount. And I'm assuming
absolutely.
there's some left over, probably.
Traditionally, in the last several years, they have raised about $150,000, give or take. And so we usually have $47,000 to $52,000 that we reappropriate through Power to Give.
And that goes to Powder Give, so whatever's
Yes,
left over, that's what you
and
yeah,
that's our
which is what you say,
crowdfunding.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
mhm.
So we'll see, we'll hear what this year is, and then we'll hear from the executive, and we'll figure out what's going on. once
Right.
we
I'd
get
also like to ask publicly if I can ask also for clarity about the Executives Awards. In our operating budget is a cost that we put aside, about $16,000, to produce the County Executives Awards. I've also asked for clarity on what the county executive would like to happen and when that will happen, and I have not heard back. And because
That's
the
in your
past
contract?
award,
That's in your.
no, it's not in our
That's just something
contract.
you've
It's
traditionally done.
It's been something that we've been asked to traditionally do.
Okay.
And so I've already asked the county executive for information, and I need that because it's usually produced in October or October. And so, of course, the time is very short for us to produce that this year. And so because it was produced with the former county executive's vision, the Arts and Humanities Council, because it's called the Executives Awards, we're not in a position to decide how the county or how the county executive would like it to happen. So we could use some direction in that regard because the time is now.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. I think you've made your request directly.
Thank you.
And I think in a larger context, I think that needs to be part of our conversation at our work sessions about this structure of how it is that we do some of these other programs and who is supposed to be responsible for these things, both financially, because if the county executive is doing them, then they should be included in the county executive's base budget. We shouldn't then be asking Arts and Humanities Council to pony up additional money outside of their budget if this is something that the county executive is doing. So I'd just like more clarity so we can seek all of that as a part of our future work session that we deal with when we talk about the future of arts. We just need to talk about the structure of all of the things that we do.
Yeah.
And if there are others, both from you, Ms. Jenkins, but also from arts organizations, please send that information to Ms. Price so that we can address all of those things as a part of that upcoming work session. All right, Ms. Price, back to you.
Okay, so then the next item is for the Public Arts Trust. I've included it in the packet. The Arts and Humanities Council had submitted a request to get additional funding in FY20. Council staff would like to point out in the packet that This item was reviewed in FY19. The council added $25,000 in FY19 and also increased the appropriation for FYs 20 and 24. And this item will not come before the council for review until we review the 21 through 2016 CIP. So I just wanted to point that out, that item will actually be before the committee for full review next budget. And then the Arts and Humanities Council had also requested an amendment to the law for the Public Arts Trust to strengthen it. Right now, the law says that the council should consider appropriating a minimum of 20 or an amount equal to 5% of the combined approved program expenditures across the county, the school system, the college, and park and planning. Looking at FY19 dollars, that amount comes to about $300,000. As you can see, that's not what is budgeted in FY19. The amount that's approved is $215,000, which is short of the $300,000 amount. However, keeping in mind that there are a number of fiscal constraints, and this project does draw on current revenue. I recommend that we look at this year by year, but I don't necessarily recommend that we change the law to require this, because this would hold our hands and the fiscal impact could change from year to year.
So I think that we need to talk about this as well. I really want to see us do a more concerted effort in terms of some of our protection of our arts throughout the county. And we've fallen woefully short year after year, which has caused a lot of our prized collection to deteriorate, which is of great concern to me. And so from that perspective, I do think that there needs to be a more serious commitment when it comes to our Public Arts Trust. It requires an actual bill be introduced, and so I'm not going to obviously be introducing that in the context of budget. But I do think this is another part of a conversation that we have this summer about what we see as the best way for us moving forward to ensure. I do understand completely, Linda, the flexibility because we are drawing on current revenue, but there may be some additional ways in which we could structure this to ensure that we're getting the commitment that's necessary while still not tying our hands. So I look forward to working with council staff as well as the AHCMC to make sure that we can address this issue appropriately. So.
So then that takes us through all of the expenditure issues in the budget this year. Just to recap, we have the work session coming up in July on the 22nd. At that time, we'll be able to look more in depth at the funding paradigm for the Arts and Humanities Council, as well as begin to look at some of the activities that deal with arts in schools, the equity initiatives that arts has been putting forward, and then the items that were added today, which include looking at the executive ball and awards and the Public Arts Trust.
Okay. Are you going to go through program updates next? Yeah.
I can.
Okay.
It just summarizes the awards that were
Okay.
granted in FY19.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. Let me, I know one of the issues that we have in the packet that I appreciate you highlighting was our Office of Legislative Oversight report. And so I really want to thank Leslie Rubin, who's working on that with Office of Legislative Oversight. I'm looking forward to continuing where Councilmember Leventhal left off in terms of looking in depth at not just Strathmore, but as a whole in terms of how our large arts houses interact with our various players. And I have some concerns. I want to be very clear that it is a challenge when I continue to hear consistently from a number of folks who are partners with some of our larger organizations that they feel as though they're getting short shrift. And that's concerning to me. And while I don't have the power, nor do I want to have the power to affect anybody's relationship when it comes to how individual managers work with their lessees. I do think that because we are talking about county assets, we do have a role in terms of ensuring that that relationship is one that works best for our community as a whole. So let me be very clear. While I might not dictate what happens, I certainly want to make sure that folks understand what we think is important to us moving forward. And so we're very intentional about looking at these relationships and ensuring that they're ones that are working for our community. Ms. Jenkins?
Thank you for that. We've had the opportunity to speak to Ms. Rubin several times and provided as much information as we can. Of course, any information that we can provide about best practices nationally that can add to continue to support all of our organizations, especially such a beautiful asset as that of Strathmore Hall, making sure that we are engaging in practices that allow it to build its strength and capacity while allowing others to build theirs too, I think is going to be an important part. And we remain available for any conversations about that and look forward to continuing to participate in that regard.
Yeah, and let me just take it a step further in that, I mean, you've eloquently stated that it is something that is so important. It is a jewel for us, but certainly one that, from my perspective, warrants us having a look at how these relationships work. You know, we've made decisions as a council on what funding we provide for various things throughout the county, not just with Strathmore. And I think that Ms. Rubin, who's expanding her look to just understand, you know, we have unique relationships with BlackRock, with other entities in terms of who pays for what, all those kinds of things. I really want to get a better understanding of how these relationships work and then what happens with the individual people that then are there, and if we're ensuring that the support that we provide is also being passed on to the organizations who are doing work and being partners with these particular organizations as well. Because what we don't want is we don't want a situation where the council and the organizations are doing the work and then the large house is just reaping the benefits of everyone else's hard work. That's not a structure that we want. I'm not saying that exists. I'm just saying that's not what we want. And so from that perspective, it's one in which I really look forward to the report that's coming out. Monica, I didn't ask a question. Linda?
That walks us through all the items in the packet.
Okay. All right. For what? You want to ask her a question? You want to ask a question? Go ahead. I don't have any questions. Councilmember Jawando.
When can, just the staff really, what's the timing on the OLO report?
It's my understanding that it should be done sometime in the summer, looking at the early part of FY20.
Okay, is that right? Okay. I see a nod. Okay, good. And so we can have the session, we can bake into
That I can't guarantee.
we're gonna have to have it. We're gonna have to set up. Yeah, maybe can
Right.
you come up for 1 second? Just, I'm sorry. I know this is budget, but I'm just curious. Thank you.
Hi, Leslie Rubin with OLO. My intention is to have the report out before the council goes on recess at the end of the summer. I
so
can't
we're gonna have to
promise that it will be ready for the discussion on July 22nd.
Okay. Well, if and realizing you work very hard, and I know you're doing a lot. If there's any way we could maybe even do a preview, or like a kind of a highlights or a cliff notes. I don't know if that's possible, but or as soon as it's done, I'm sure the chair wants to do a full session on this too after in the fall. But so whatever you think is possible. But
We can talk about it and see
Okay.
if there's, yeah, we can talk about that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's it.
Ms. Price, anything else for us?
That concludes everything for items 1 and 2. The next item is for cost sharing.
Okay. I see that, before you conclude, I think that, Monica, you've come up to the dais. I assume there's something that you'd like to add to our conversation?
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. I simply wanted to add that Strathmore is cooperating fully with the Office of Legislative Oversight on this investigation. I encourage you to reach out and share with me any concerns that you have. We've met on a couple of occasions. We are very interested in providing as much information as possible so that the council has a full understanding of the relationship between Strathmore and Montgomery County. I would say that for 38 years, we've been tremendous stewards of that investment and taken great care of the county's asset. And I assure you, we are extremely interested in making sure that all of our partnerships are effective and rewarding for all involved.
I appreciate your partnership and just would make sure that it's not an investigation, it's just research. You know, there's no, an investigation to me involves some sort of negative, you know, wrongdoing type of thing. I don't see that as that being the case. You know, we just want to figure out and get as much information as we can. So I'd consider it more, just as you said, information gathering than investigation. I don't like that word. That's negative.
To that point then, it was a little shocking to hear your assessment that perhaps the big house is reaping all the benefits.
Well, so if we want to go into this soliloquy, we can. It's one in which that's what I hear from some of your partners. And so from that perspective, that is concerning. And so, you know, we can certainly address this now, or we can, you know, address this later. I would suggest we address this later. So
I
I'll
look
leave it at
forward
that.
to it.
All right.
Thank you. So that now takes us to the cost-sharing CIP amendment. There are a number of recommendations that the executive has put forward in cost sharing. They touch arts capital grants as well as community grants. In FY20, the executive has recommended grants that total $1,583,581. Before I start, I would just like to note that there were a number of savings that were found in this project that were able to go towards paying for a number of the amendments. Specifically, there were $400,000 that were from decline grants, as well as leftover funds from grants that just came in a little less than the amount that had been appropriated. And then we had unprogrammed grants taken from arts and humanities capital grants in FY19 and 20. And then also we had a project that was moved out of cost sharing over to planned life cycle asset replacement within the Department of General Services to make repairs and renovations at the Black Rock Center for the Arts. Okay, so I will walk the committee through the 4 changes that the executive has recommended for arts capital grants and cost sharing. They total $253,581. The first one is for Sandy Spring Museum. They've requested $80,000, and the executive has recommended that amount to make a number of repairs to the exterior and the grounds at the museum. And they also have brought forward a state bond bill as well as a number of donations. And council staff recommends approval for that. The next item is for Imagination Stage. The executive has recommended funding their full request of $41,150. This is to make updates to their HVAC control system. I'm sure Councilmember Rice remembers in FY17, the committee and the council did appropriate a grant of $48,000 for the HVAC system. That was actually for the chillers. This goes back and makes updates to their control system. And council staff recommends approval of that item. The next item is for the Glen Echo Park Partnership for Arts. The executive again has recommended funding their full request of $88,833. This would continue making repairs in their historic Spanish ballroom, as well as a number of other repairs to the exterior, and then also would replace the roof. And council staff is recommending approval on that, and they also have a match grant for that. The final item that comes forward within the Arts Capital Grants is for Montgomery Community Television. This is in coordination with their they're opening a new location in Silver Spring, helps with building out the set, as well as providing production materials. The executive has not recommended funding their full request. He's recommended a partial amount, $43,598. It is council staff's understanding that they will be able to accomplish making all of the repairs without receiving the full amount from the executive. So council staff concurs with the recommendation.
I think without objection. I did just want to say, and this is a part of some of this, not all of it, but it's certainly a part of our greater conversation around our relationship with some of our houses and how we do things a little bit differently, depending, I used to, in true fidelity, used to sit on BlackRock's board, and the reason why I got off immediately is because we continue to make decisions like this around these particular issues, but they are as equally concerning. It's not just about one organization. It's about all and all the things that we do and why we do for some and not for others. And there really needs to be some consistency amongst what it is that we're doing and a better understanding of why we're doing what we're doing for those that we're doing it for. All of those kinds of things. And I've got some of the history. I mean, just as you said, I voted for the Imagination Stage and the Chillers and those kinds of things. And they're compelling requests, and they're urgent, and there are challenges that are facing, but there are also programming issues that also affect, and we pay debt service when we pay for capital, and so it still costs us money beyond just the dollars that are expended. And so how do we balance between, just saying, well, this is a CIP, and so we can look the other way in terms of quote unquote earmarks or direct money going to organizations that's not through a process. And so I'm very concerned about this and how we do this, because this is not what I'd like to see us doing when it comes to arts organizations as a whole. There needs to be some more consistency in terms of a finite, or not even finite, a defined process.
Right.
Ms.
Well,
Price.
I will add for the Arts and Humanities Capital Grants that there is a review panel that does meet every year to provide the executive with recommendations. Members of the panel include Susan Jenkins, Deborah Lambert, as well as Ismi Ayala Colazo in the Department of General Services, as well as Walt Harris from Councilmember Joando's office, and I believe and Susan Hoffman as well. So this panel has been convening, I want to say, for the last 6 or 7 years and making recommendations to the executive. So they do have a process. Their application process, the guidelines are posted on Arts and Humanities Council's website. So I just would offer that.
What are the guidelines when it comes to this? Linda said that there are guidelines that are posted in terms of who's eligible. Is it open to anyone? Ms. Jenkins.
Absolutely, the guidelines are pretty explicit, because you're asking for capital money. There are certain things that need to be in place to make certain that the organization has the capacity to enact a capital grant. But if I may, I'd like to make a remark about something else that you mentioned.
Please.
I want to go back to the legislation that puts the Arts and Humanities Council in the center of doing the work for the county, right? And so last summer, I wrote an email from my personal email to the county council asking about equity in that process. I'm bringing that up today because when we had the panel for the capital projects, and this is indeed the recommendation that the board sent to the county executive, then comes to you, which is clearly articulated in the guidelines. We were under the impression that we had $1 million in that fund because that was in the CIP PDF. But just when I read the packet, I learned that the remaining, the idea is to appropriate $311,000, $179 of the million, and that the remaining $702,419 has been reappropriated. Now, I'll say that this is the county's money, and certainly the county can do with it what it pleases. That said, However, there was another resolution that came out last summer that said when organizations seek funding, that if they are arts and humanities organizations, that they would come through our agency, your designated local, and that there were other community-based grants, they would go through my colleague Carolyn Chen. So my point today is that I see under the CE grants, community grants, area capital requests, that I have several of our grantees, namely Only Theater and Roundhouse, who have requested CIP funds that amount to $900,000. However, if the 702,419 hadn't been taken away from the million, we might have been really close to be able to look at that request, and it could have been evaluated on with a level playing field to the others who are asking for capital support grants. Now, one thing that may have tipped that scale is that the guidelines state, I believe, this is off the top of my head, I hadn't seen this, but I believe that the guidelines state that an applicant can apply up to a request of up to $250,000. But if that means that we just need to change the threshold so that we don't break the system, I ask the council in your wisdom to consider how we might be able
Certainly not infinite.
I was cautious, respectfully so, to figure out a way how we can, level the playing field so that everyone applies with the same requirements when they are wanting to do the same thing, so that others who may be in that position who didn't know you could, that we gain equity with those. Yesterday, I moderated a panel for nonprofit Montgomery, and a young man, his name is Elijah Wheeler. You may know him, but I don't know his organization. It seemed like it needed a really short acronym, but it just went on that organization's name. But
Collaboration Council for Children, Youth, and Families or something.
but then he does something, but he said something
Well
that
done.
was so stark. Every now and then you hear something that's so stark and you can't, it's like a earbug. You can't get it out of your head. And he said, for the privileged, equity feels like oppression. And it was such a deep moment, because if you know how to go and how to get and what to say so that you can be considered in another way, different than what the crowd is having to be considered by, then that inequitable situation then is a disincentive to those who only want to follow the rules. I'm not insinuating that they didn't follow the rules. I'm sure there are rules to apply to my dear colleague Carolyn Shen's, the grants that she administers for you. But I'm just asking for a consistency with a rollout of equity that allows everyone to understand what the rules are, and then to try to play by those so that we can deliver the best to the county, but also deliver it in a way that allows everyone to start out at least on an equitable ground.
That's great. And I'm actually going to do my first equity information infomercial right now. For every single arts organization, please share with everyone you know. You can reach out to your own individual delegate as well as senator to get a bond bill to help you when it comes to capital improvements for your particular entity. I did it for 4 years, from 2006 to 10. It is lots of money that's available at the state level for capital expenses, so none of you are excluded from reaching out to your local senator and 3 delegates and asking them to put in a bond bill for you. There's no such thing as too small, and quite honestly, there's really no such thing as too large. We've done bond bills for the universities at Shady Grove, for their multi-million-dollar parking garage. It goes everywhere in between. So from that perspective, I encourage all of you to reach out. It's a way in which you can leverage that additional state funding, which will help you when it comes to putting forth your own capital projects. That's my infomercial. Linda, back to you.
I am actually going to turn it over to my colleague to walk through the community grants.
Hello.
Carolyn. Welcome, Ms. Chen.
In the thunder.
If you can please introduce yourself for the
I'm
record.
Carolyn Chen. I'm the Council Grants Manager and Legislative Analyst. I'm here to speak to you about the capital grants that were submitted underneath the community grants. We can start on page 4. The executive recommended budget included $1.33 million in capital grants. 15 of those capital grants were under Health and Human Services, and 2 capital grants were arts. And I've listed out a couple of exhibits. One is the first page on page 4. Those are the 2 arts capital grants that are being designated to be given out in community grants. Page 5 and 6 have the rest of the 15 organizations that applied under community grants who are ineligible to apply for an arts capital grant that are being designated for funding by the executive there in this budget. And in the last 2 pages, pages 6 and 7 is a list of the 17 organizations that applied for a capital grant through community grants and were not recommended by the executive. And so what we're looking at here in the chart on page 4 and 5, which is what's special about capital grants that we've talked a little bit about, Craig did, was about matching funds. So I wanted to show that in the first column, which is the third column, is what was recommended by the executive for the grant in particular, what was the ask of the organization, what is the attached state bond bill for this year that is used, so it'll be a direct leverage of this year's state bond bill, and if the next column is what they received last year, if they did in fiscal year 19, and especially if some of the matching funds coming this year are actually to match last year's bonds. I also added some footnotes on page 5 and 6 to the 15 organizations in the community grants capital requests that are not arts organizations, just to give you a history on the trajectory of funding for capital grants for specific organizations. Some organizations don't have a state bond bill for matching grants, which means that they would need to fundraise that money an organization on their own. I think what our discussion this entire session today is that in July we will be revisiting the community grants process as well as the capital grants process for arts, health and human services, and any organization. And part of this will be a discussion on how to review capital grants.
Excellent. So I'm going to turn to my colleague and just say I don't think there's any objection to recommending the funding requests at the level recommended by the executive.
Just have another question,
yes,
if I might.
please, Ms. Jenkins.
So I misspoke. I was looking at the FY19 CIP funding when I added 650 and 250, and that came up
Right,
to
to the
900,000. I see that it was 500,000. So when I see that,
Even more so.
when I see that, then I see that it was well within the 720 that was taken away for other things. Why is that these 2 arts organizations did not go through the regular CIP process?
So actually, this is not just a capital grant question. This is a community grant question. For all community grants, we had 492 applications with a total ask of $30 million. 10% of that ask for capital and operating grants were from arts organizations. So that's a discussion that we are having for the next round cycle. The reason why 10% of the ask is from arts organizations is because there's not enough money in the Arts and Humanities Council to meet the demand of what the arts organizations needs. So we're seeing arts organizations in the capital and in the operating community grants asked. So we have those numbers. I think I can share it with you. We have $685,000, which includes this 500 that were recommended by the executive for grants that are arts and humanities organizations, and we had 22 apply.
So, Ms. Jenkins, to answer your question more philosophically, it would be our hope and intention that we move to a place in which all of the arts and humanities grants are handled via the Arts and Humanities Council. That is the proper way in which for us to do it. And based on a financial perspective, we have not been able to achieve the means with which we would be able to handle that sort of task. And so by us increasing the amount as a part of our grants for this year's budget, we are starting to put a down payment on heading in that direction. And so I would hope that based on our discussions this summer, that we'll be able to get to a place, we're already talking about our council grants as a whole when it comes to that structure, but to make sure that there is a clear delineation between what happens with arts and humanities and what happens with our other community grants. So
Right.
from that perspective, I certainly understand where you're looking to go. And I think that in just conversations with my colleague here on the dais, we'd like to see that same parity that exists between the two and that separation and delineation between the two to avoid these kinds of one-offs, two-offs from occurring.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember.
Yep. All right, so again, as we've said, we're not upsetting the apple cart right now. So we'll continue and approve without objection for these recommendations. That brings us to the end of our third packet and the end of our session. I look forward to having a conversation around a lot of these issues this summer. Again, as I said before, change is not easy. It's hard, and it's uncomfortable, but it's one in which needs to happen. We're starting to see the county executive in his proposals of changing some of the things that they're looking to do when it comes to budgeting, so this isn't unique just to the council. I look forward to seeing what the county executive has proposed when it comes to arts in the future, and working with him and his administration on continuing to make sure that the arts is lifted up. My goal is not to tear anything down and destroy it. It's to make sure that we're doing what we can to support all of our organizations in Montgomery County, every single one. And how that happens is going to be the sausage-making process, and we know that it's not pretty. So I look forward to working with you and rolling up our sleeves. We are adjourned.